What's up, guys? Welcome to, drumroll please, Godtrepreneur Talks. So Godtrepreneur Talks is originally recorded on my Instagram page. Sometimes it'll just be me talking, and other times I'll be interviewing different people, and I'll be uploading those to YouTube. So if you enjoyed this episode of Godtrepreneur Talks and you want to catch it live, make sure that you follow me on Instagram and you turn on the little notification things for when I go live, so that way you never miss an episode of Godtrepreneur Talks. I hope you enjoy this episode, and I hope to see you on the live recording next time.
I think we got it. Hold up. I accepted the request. I accepted. There we go. Pastor Phil, what is up?
All that confusion?
It's quite all right. I think we are good to go. So can you guys hear Pastor Phil? You're a little blurry on my end.
Okay.
How's the Brookfield First Wi-Fi?
Is that getting better?
Yes, definitely getting better.
There you go. Okay.
All right. Well, we can hear you. We can see you. The anticipation has been building, and we are now ready. Pastor Phil, I just want to first say thank you, guys. Thank you, guys. I'm saying thank you, guys, because I know Pastor Sam is there helping and Gio's over here helping. But thank you for taking the time to come on here. I know it's a busy life running a church and being a grandfather and all of that good stuff. So I appreciate your time. I appreciate you as a pastor, as a leader, as just a role model for people in general. You are an incredible individual, and I'm probably more excited to interview you than I have been to interview anybody. But you're actually my first interview, so that's not really saying much. But I love you. All right, Pastor Phil. So before we get into this, I just want to give a quick background. So Pastor Phil is the pastor of Brookfield First in Brookfield, Connecticut. If you guys are within a 3-hour driving distance, I would highly suggest getting to their Easter service. They're going to be doing a Friday night at, I believe, 6 p.m. worship and prayer, and so Good Friday you could spend over there. And then Sunday at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, you can show up to church and have an incredible time. They're going to be doing some Easter festivities with the kids, an Easter egg hunt, and all of that good stuff. And you will also get a good word. All right. So, Pastor Phil, thank you so much for coming on here. The people want to know, and I am the people. Before we get into like the real meat of what it is we'll be talking about, I'm just curious, how did you become a pastor and start church planting? Like, how did that happen? Where are you from? Like, quick childhood leading up to that right there.
Thanks. Tonight, glad to be here. I hope you can hear me okay if I'm clear enough. So I was raised in a Christian home. My dad was a pastor. In fact, my grandfather was a pastor. So,
hey, Pastor Phil, just I'm sorry, 1 second. I think the phone, is it just resting on something? All right, if we could elevate it a little bit, because I think that's what's muffling the
okay, how's that? Is that
the
better?
audio? Yes, that's much better. Sorry to make you hold your phone throughout this whole entire process.
I might get tired here, but that's fine. So
just tell Sam to hold it. You can just Pastor Sam, just hold the phone.
he's on with me virtually. He's not here to hold it, but
okay.
Yeah.
All right, so the floor is yours.
So I was raised in a Christian home. My dad was a pastor, and his dad was a pastor. And so I think I was in my teenage years, late teenage years, I came to real personal faith in Christ, and my life changed dramatically. The old saying is God has no grandchildren. And it's true. We have to have a personal relationship with Jesus for ourselves. And I came into that as a late teenager, and almost immediately I sensed a calling that this was going to be my life. I was going to go into ministry. I can't explain that. It was something that came to me as a growing conviction before I left school. Before that, I thought I'd like to be a lawyer or something like that. And then overnight, everything just changed. And the church began to recognize in me some calling and some gifts, and they confirmed that. So that's really how it all started. And then I went off, I worked for a few years. I thought that was important. And then I went to Bible college and prepared, and then we church planted while we were in Bible college, and then we ended up moving to the island of Tasmania, where we spent 12 years pastoring churches. And then 18 years ago, actually nearly 19 years ago, we moved to Connecticut, and I've been at this church ever since. So that's the short version.
So how's the weather difference between Tasmania and Brookfield?
Yeah, it's colder here and hotter here. So you got more seasons and more extremes here. Tasmania is very temperate, and so it was a bit of a change.
Yeah, I know. I lived in Connecticut for maybe 6 months, and it was the coldest 6 months of my life. So, all right. So, beyond that, I know that you are always traveling. You're always traveling. You do a lot of trips with the church. You came to Guatemala with us to marry us. Thank you for that. It seems like not during the pandemic, obviously, you haven't been traveling as much, but from my perspective, you always have trips on the books, right? Sure. And, I know that with the church, they're circled around. I know you have a trip to Greece that goes to all of the places that Paul was preaching. I know you have a trip to Israel. I believe that's coming up in May. You always have something, but I want to know, do you ever do any traveling, just for yourself, just for fun? Okay, I need a weekend getaway. Do you do anything besides church travel?
Yeah, sure. In fact, I love to do that. We, by the way, the trip that we had going to Israel has been postponed. It's a hangover of COVID. They kind of was shutting everything down, so we've had to push that back at the moment. But yeah, Israel is an amazing trip, and these other trips, and very often a missions trip going. But in terms of our own travel, if we get a chance, it's been a few years now, but my wife and I do love to go back to visit our family in Australia. We've done that a few times. And then our favorite vacation is to go and do one of those cruises, because it's great to just completely get away. I love it that as soon as you sail out, your cell phone dies and you're not in contact with everybody. I love that. So I love seeing new places, love traveling, but haven't had enough chance to do it the last couple of years. Really enjoyed coming to Guatemala. Thank you for that honor. And that was the first trip we'd made in a while. So.
Yeah, well, we had a blast with you. My family loved hanging out with you guys. So for those of you that are tuning in that don't know, Pastor Phil came out to marry Gio and I, but he came out a few days early to come check out the schools that we build in Guatemala. And, we only went there for one day. So for the rest of the time, he got to hang out with my brothers, my mother, and just go exploring all of Guatemala. So I'm glad we could give you a little mini vacation, since it's something that you enjoy.
And now I'm marrying your brother too.
I know, that's crazy, right?
This can be happening. Yep.
Yeah, but two weddings. If we could get the third, and then maybe my sister. This would be a grand slam,
Sure.
Grand slam. But all right, so enough with the personal stuff. Let's get down to the meat of this conversation, right? So we're coming up on Easter, and during this time, and I've made videos about this before and spoken about this before, but during this time, it seems like the Christian headhunters come out, and they just go on a rampage during Easter. They're like, Easter's a pagan holiday. There is no evidence for Jesus' resurrection, and your faith is in vain because there is no evidence for a resurrection. So Easter shouldn't even be important to you. Just go, get your little eggs and chocolate and Cadbury and stuff like that, and stop pushing your beliefs on us. Like, I feel like there's always a meme, there's always a video, there's always a family member or something like that in the crowd saying all that stuff. So we want to get into some really important topics for this season. And when I was thinking about what would I want to ask Pastor Phil, the list is really long. Like, there's a really long list of things that I want to ask you. But I figured we could narrow it down and be very focused. So the first thing that I want to ask, and just so you guys know, the reason that, not the only reason, but one of the many reasons that I love going to Brookfield first is because of how much Pastor Phil digs into history. And I feel like it's so important to do that because I came to Christianity very skeptical. I was very skeptical. I didn't believe in the resurrection. I didn't believe God, it just didn't make any sense to me. I thought the Bible was just made up and that it had no historical foundation. These are things that I thought. So going and hearing Pastor Phil preach, and he's been in Mark for 70 weeks or something like that. And he literally breaks down the historical context of everything. And for me, that is, some people don't need that at all, but for me, I need that stuff. So that's why we chose these questions, because this is something that you are very well educated on, and history being one of them. And I believe you're going for your master's, right, in what is it, biblical archaeology or something, right?
Yeah, archaeology and biblical history.
Yeah, archaeology and biblical history. So you gave me told me to get this textbook of a book right here that I've just been diving into, and it's been blowing my mind. So let's get into it. Pastor Phil, is Easter a pagan holiday?
That's a great question to ask first, because let's get it out of the way. Whenever I hear somebody say that, they say, Easter is just a pagan holiday, I know that they've run out of arguments. It's really the last ditch effort. And because it's a silly argument, really. And of course, it's not just said about Easter. It's said about Christmas as well. People say, Christmas is just a pagan holiday, or has its roots in a pagan holiday. In fact, the same people kind of say that about the whole of Christianity. They say, it just developed out of pagan roots. It's superstition. It comes out of other things. It's a whole mishmash of ideas. And when someone says that, we know historically that's patently not true, because we have very good documentation on the beginnings of the Christian church, and it does not come from pagan roots at all. And the whole idea of Easter coming from pagan roots is just not tenable. First of all, let me say this. Let's just imagine that you and I, John, were Christians in the year 35 to 40 AD. All right, so the whole thing is brand new. Crucifixion has just happened about 30 AD. So this is brand new. We're some of the first Christians. If we sat down to make a calendar so that we could commemorate the important moments in the life of Jesus and the early church, if we wanted to build a calendar, what date on the calendar is not linked with a pagan festival? See, this is the big argument. They say, December 25th, the pagans were worshiping like this, they were doing that. Well, so what? A couple of weeks ago, someone gave me a calendar for 2022, and it was actually an Indian calendar, and I just opened it up, and all the Hindu festivals are in there. There's basically a festival every day of the year. And that is really typical of ancient religions, and so forth. And so you wouldn't be able to find a date when there wasn't a pagan festival on. The fact that they're celebrated on the same day means absolutely nothing. The fact is, we do have a tie-in for why Christians celebrate Easter. It is tied to an ancient feast, but it is not a pagan one, because the Easter celebration is linked with Passover, which is a Jewish feast. It goes back thousands of years. And if you know anything of the history, Passover celebrates the time when the Israelites came out of slavery in Egypt. You know the story, Charlton Heston, the Ten Commandments, crossing the Red Sea. And so that was the celebration of Passover. Well, fast forward hundreds of years, city of Jerusalem, around about 30 AD, Jesus is alive. He and his disciples come up to Jerusalem at the feast of Passover. And that's the week that Jesus died on the cross and rose again from the dead. So there's our Easter celebration. It coincides with the Jewish Passover. And that's important because actually there are many link-ups. The Jewish Passover was all about the sacrifice for sin, and Jesus fulfilled it in some incredible ways. So that's where the link-up is. It's with Passover. And that, by the way, is why Easter falls at different times of the calendar. So some years we celebrate it in March. Sometimes we celebrate it in April, like this year. It's later. It's because it's following the Jewish lunar calendar and their feasts. So this idea that it comes from a pagan festival is pretty silly. Then people say, well, Easter, that name comes from the name of a Roman goddess, so that proves it's pagan. Well, there is not, that tie-in is very tenuous. The fact is that early Christians, we think this is probably the strongest theory about where the name Easter comes from. The early Christians celebrated the death and resurrection of Jesus around Passover, and they started calling it in Latin in albis. And when that name took hold, hundreds of years later, in Europe, they're celebrating it, and it was translated into German. And by the way, in albis means dawn or rising. Okay, so you can see the tie-in there with the resurrection of Jesus, right? In albis, the rising. And so then hundreds of years later, it was translated into German, and in German, that's Easterum, which is close to Easter. That's probably where we get the name from, and it is not a pagan thing at all. Now, there's a lot of baggage around Easter. You mentioned before about bunnies and chocolate and all that sort of stuff, but you got to kind of divide those things out. It's like Santa Claus and Christmas. Santa is not integral to the Christian celebration of Christmas, and Easter bunny has nothing to do with the Christian celebration of Easter. But this idea it's a pagan thing is nonsense.
Interesting. And I'm actually glad that they have the whole Easter bunny thing, because there are these mini eggs.
Oh yeah.
That I just enjoy so much. They don't really have them here in Puerto Rico. We found one bag and they were like old. You ever like had chocolate and it's just like old, Yeah. So very disappointing, but it's very interesting. I'm taking notes as you're talking because I heard all of the the things like you said about like Ishtar being Easter and like all this like meme theology, I like to call it. It's memeology, right. They just cherry pick things and they none of it's like peer reviewed, you know what I mean? None of it's like peer reviewed scholarship, and it's I guess you could say it's peer reviewed by peers on social media, but not scholarly. So that's actually very interesting. And so I did a response to some anti-Christian TikToks, and one of the things was how the letter J didn't come into existence until 600 years ago, and they said that Isus is somehow related to Zeus, like Hail Zeus and all this stuff. And I'm like, oh my gosh, it's a simple Google search can tell you like how the Y turns to the I and then turns to the J. Like it just, it's crazy. But anyway, that's why I wanted to have you answer that question. And that was actually a pretty clean cut, like straight to the point answer. And what I'm gonna do, guys, also is, whenever I do interviews and stuff like this, I don't like to just claim things without any sources. So Pastor Phil is like a source material person. I'll have him email me where you can find this information, and I'll put it in the description of the video when I upload it to YouTube. So I always like to provide sources on claims that are made, because the internet is full of just, I call it false claiming, POAs, pulled out of the air. The next question that we have on the list is there evidence for the resurrection of Jesus? And before you answer this question, because I know the answer, but I want to hear your answer. this is actually what helped me become a Christian. It was studying the resurrection and studying the do we have good evidence to believe that this is even possible? And then when you look at the explanations, and I looked at like what every explanation was from what do New Age say about the resurrection? What do atheists say about it? What do people like Bart Ehrman say about it, who really fights for against the Jesus mythologies, but he's not a believer. Like, what is his reasons for the resurrection? And like the more that I listened to the skeptics, it just didn't make sense. It's like it's like me holding this phone case right here, like me holding this phone case, and me trying to come up with all of the reasons why I'm not really holding it when it's right in front of my face. Like I'm looking at it, and I'm just trying to give every explanation that I could possibly give, that this is not in my hand right now, and it's in my hand. And that's how I felt when I listened to it, when I did my research on it. So, what evidence do we have for the resurrection of Christ? And take as much time as you want on this, because I know there's a lot, but I'm interested to hear maybe something that that I didn't even know about. So I know that there's people that are listening on here that would really like to know, because if we're putting our faith in something, we want to know that there's good reason to put our faith in it. So, floor is yours.
Yeah, so is there evidence for the resurrection? Well, absolutely yes, there is evidence. And I would say that we really have an embarrassment of riches in the sense of there's so much evidence for the resurrection of Jesus. And I can give you a number of things. Literally, we could spend the rest of the evening talking about this. And it's a question of how long is your program, because there's so many things that we could talk about. But I'll give you my kind of top 4 or 5 things that are evidence of the resurrection. And the first one, of course, is the eyewitness accounts. We have eyewitness accounts written down of people who saw Jesus. They witnessed his death, and then they saw him alive again. And in the New Testament, we have 5 particular eyewitness accounts. 4 of them are the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And then we have the account of Saul of Tarsus, who later became known as the Apostle Paul. So he gives us an account of meeting the risen Jesus. So we've got eyewitness accounts of people who saw Jesus after he was risen from the dead, and then wrote down all of the details. And they are remarkably correlated, so that they agree with one another on all the pertinent points. Then Paul, when he's writing his letter the first letter to the Corinthians, he says that and in his day, this is like 20 or so years after the crucifixion, he says in his day there were more than 500 people who saw Jesus alive after his resurrection, who were still alive and in the Christian churches. And Paul is literally inviting them and saying, ask these people for yourself. They saw Jesus alive. Now, had he been making that claim and it wasn't true, it would have been discredited immediately. So that's not something you would write unless it was true. But he says there were more than 500 people who saw Jesus alive after he had risen from the dead. So the eyewitnesses is really key to us, those documents that we have in the New Testament. But here's the thing. It's not just the fact that we have eyewitnesses, but it's the persistence of the eyewitnesses. And what I mean by that is that these witnesses who said they saw Jesus alive, they preached that to the degree that they faced intense persecution for saying it. So these early Christians were preaching Jesus risen from the dead, and they were being persecuted by Jewish people, they were being persecuted by the Romans for it. And in fact, if you look at the first disciples of Jesus, 12 men, one, of course, was Judas Iscariot, who disappears from the picture, but then he's replaced by another disciple. Of those 12 men who were eyewitnesses of Jesus' death and resurrection, 11 of them were killed for preaching that. for bringing the Christian gospel and insisting that Jesus was alive. Only one died of natural causes, but even he faced incredible persecution. He was exiled, put in prison, and so forth. That's the Apostle John. So they paid an enormous price for this. Now, there's a guy by the name of Charles Coulson, and you've probably heard of him. He was one of the inner circle of Richard Nixon's White House. And when the Watergate scandal broke, he was one of the guys who ended up going to prison for all of what they perpetrated. Now, Charles Coulson, later on, he was a brilliant attorney before he ever got to the White House. He went through Watergate and so forth. Later on, he became a Christian. And he said in his book, because he wrote a book about his conversion to Christianity, he said one of the things that convinced him that the resurrection had to be true was that those original disciples all maintained their eyewitness account until the day of their death. They never recanted it. He said he was a member of a cabinet around Richard Nixon of just 6 or 8 guys who were involved in everything that was going on. And when Watergate broke, they made an oath to each other that they would stick to their story, their untrue story about what had happened, and that they would stand up for each other. That within days, every single one of those guys ran to the Attorney General's office and to the media to cut a deal, to save their own skin. And this was his point. Men don't die for a hoax. They don't die for a charade or a lie. They will die for the truth. That's been shown through history again and again. And he said that absolutely convinced him. These 12 eyewitnesses went to death for what they believed. And so he said they wouldn't have died for a lie. It must be true. So it's the eyewitnesses and the persistence of the eyewitnesses. But just back up for 1 minute, because people will then object and say, yeah, but I don't even believe those guys existed. How do we know that any of that is true? Didn't maybe some guy hundreds of years later just sat down, ate a lot of pizza and wrote the New Testament? I mean, how do we know where it came from? So how reliable are these witnesses? How reliable are the documents that we have? Well, here's what we have to say. And historians today, and I'm not talking about Christian historians, historians across the board, secular historians will tell you there's no real doubt about the life of Jesus of Nazareth. Nobody questions that anymore. There's too much attestation for that, even in secular historians. But when it comes to the resurrection, the New Testament are some of the most well-attested documents we have from antiquity, period. So let me give you some examples of this. Some of the real important historical writings that we have that we appeal to all the time in history. When you're in high school, you may have been forced to read the Iliad by Homer, the Greek philosopher Homer, right? Now that's considered a great insight into the ancient world, recording actual events that took place, all right? Here's what we know. We have about 640 copies of the Iliad from antiquity. So these are the parchments that were copied and copied. They didn't have photocopiers. They didn't have printing presses. They had to hand write the thing out. That's how these documents lasted, because they would perish over time and they would have to be replaced. So they had copies. We have about 640 copies of Iliad. The earliest copy that we have of the Iliad is 2,200 years after Homer lived, right? 2,200 years later. So, and all the copies that had to be made in that time, how close to the original is it? We don't know, all right? So that's Homer's Iliad. It's respected. The historians talk about the Iliad as an important document. I'll give you another example. The Gallic Wars, which was written by Julius Caesar, co-written by Julius Caesar, okay? How many copies of the Gallic Wars do we have? 10 copies is all that we possess. And the earliest copy that we have is 1,000 years after Julius Caesar lived. So there's 1,000 years before you find the first copy that's available to us, all right? So let me tell you again, the Iliad, 640 copies, 2,200 years after the fact. The Gallic Wars, 10 copies 1,000 years after the fact. Do you know how many copies of the New Testament or parts of the New Testament we have? We have 5,500 documents. 5,500 copies. And the earliest copies that we have go back to within 70 years of the original writing. That is absolutely unheard of with historic documents. There's reasons for that. We could give reasons, why it was so well preserved. But if you're going, here's the point. If you're going to write off the New Testament and say, I just don't believe the New Testament, okay, you can do that. But to be consistent, you have to also write off every historical writing that we have, because nothing matches the New Testament for reliability and verification purposes. So you have to write it off. In other words, we don't know anything about history if we don't accept the New Testament. We don't know anything. And it's pointless even trying to study it. So if you're going to be consistent, you have to take the New Testament as a very historic and reliable document. And that's where we get the eyewitnesses from. All right? So that's the first thing about evidence for the resurrection, is that we have these amazing eyewitness documents. And it's extraordinary what they tell us about the death and resurrection of Jesus. Another proof of the resurrection for me is the emergence of the early church, the fact of the church's birth and its quick growth. Because after the crucifixion of Jesus, within a 20-year period, the gospel of Jesus, the message of the church, spread all the way across the Mediterranean, up through Asia Minor, and to the city of Rome and into Europe in 20 years. That is unprecedented in the history of the world for any movement. Happened in 20 years. Within 100 years, the entire known world had received the gospel, and churches were planted in their cultures. It is absolutely astonishing. Now think about this. If the early church was a ragtag group of people, I mean, they were underground, they were being hunted down by the Romans, they were being killed in the Colosseum and everything, and they were largely poor people, not exclusively, but largely poor people. It was a ragtag group that started the early church. Now, if you had to put money on which would survive, the Christian church or the Roman Empire, who would you give the odds to in the first century? Fact is, Roman Empire lasted a few hundred years and it was gone. The Christian church has never taken a backward step in 2,000 years. The Christian church has gone on and on and on. When historians look back in history, they're looking for social movements. They look for major social changes. And this is absolutely incomparable with any other movement that the world has ever seen. So that's incredible. And that leads us to one more evidence of the resurrection of Jesus, and that is the church today, the growing church today, because all across the world you have people who still claim that their lives have been changed, transformed by the message of Jesus Christ. And the church is growing at in terms of history, it's never grown as fast as it's growing right now in the world. It's amazing. Now, sometimes you'll hear people come on the radio. They'll say, well, the growth of Islam is outstripping the growth of Christianity. Can I tell you, they don't know what they're talking about. Because if you go to missiologists and other people who study the spread of religions in the world today, they will tell you Christianity is growing faster than any other religion. Now, Islam is growing very fast. But here's the little secret about their growth. If you look at any of the major religions of the world today, you look at Islam, you look at Hinduism, you look at Buddhism, they are growing almost exclusively by biological growth. That means people have children, and those children, because they're born to a Muslim family or a Hindu family or a Buddhist family, they are expected, you are Muslim, you are Hindu, you're whatever. it's almost exclusively that. There is some conversion, but it's anomalous. Okay? Christianity is growing biologically in a sense. I'll talk about that in a moment. But it's growing by conversion. People coming from every kind of worldview, people coming from atheism, from secular humanism, from the other religions of the world, who are converting to Christianity. By the way, where is the greatest Christian revival in the world today? Which is growing faster than any other nation in the world today in Christian terms for the population? It is the nation of Iran. And what are they? They are almost completely Muslim, and they're converting to Christianity. And by the way, the Christian church in Iran is growing, led by women. So in a culture that oppresses women, Christianity is growing incredibly fast, and it's growing under the leadership of women. It's astonishing, right? I'd also say this, that if you look at the growth of other religions and how their biological growth, people could say, well, Christianity is growing largely by biological growth. That's true, except for one thing, that Christianity is unique in that every generation of Christians, when they have their children, they teach them the faith, but the message is this: you must come to personal faith yourself. Christians teach that to their children. That's not true of the other religions. Other religions say you were born a Muslim, you'll always be a Muslim. Christians say you must come to this faith personally. So even the biological growth of Christianity is actually conversion growth, because people have to come to a personal crisis of faith. So it's quintessentially any other religion. All of that to say this: they're still being changed. Christianity cannot be a movement in the history of the world. And that, to me, is the greatest proof of the fact that Jesus is alive.
Pastor Phil, you're gonna have to repeat the last 30 seconds because you disappeared. So just repeat the last 30 seconds.
Okay, I'll try and remember the last 30
Yeah,
seconds.
I know. Whenever I say something, Gio's like, "What'd you just say?" And I'm like, you got to catch it in a moment, girl.
So I guess I was talking about the growing church and the fact that Christianity is growing by, even its biological growth is conversion growth, because every generation has to come to their own crisis of faith by our own teaching. We say to our children, you must find faith for yourself. So it's very different to the other religions. Christianity is still changing lives. And that, to me, is the greatest proof of the fact that Jesus rose from the dead and is still alive.
Amen. Whoever tuned in to this, if you're getting value out of it, just put a little fire emoji down there, because this is good stuff, Pastor Phil. Good stuff. I just want to backtrack on some things that you said. I was taking notes, and I'm so glad that you touched on the reliability of the New Testament in terms of being a reliable historical document, because that's one of the objections that you get all the time of how do we, like how you said, just some guys order some pizza and write this stuff down, you know what I mean? So I'm glad that you touched on that, because that was something that helped me. Paul's conversion was one of the I guess you could say, like, really pivotal moments for me when it came to it, because he literally gave up everything.
Yeah.
He had a pretty good life. I mean, he seemed like he was miserable, but he had a pretty good, life. And to give all that up for me was definitely one of the reasons why I really had to take into account Jesus just might be who he says he is, and Paul just might have really saw the risen Christ. Like, I really had to take that into consideration. Boom. So just quick, the book of the letter to the Corinthians. I just want you to, for the people who are on here who may not really know what these letters are, the epistles, what were Paul's letters? Like, who was he writing to? Why was he writing to it? And because I feel that context can add even more significant value to to how reliable these documents are.
So most of the letters that you find in the New Testament were correspondence that Paul wrote to churches that were, had been planted, most of them by him, actually. He had planted these churches and moved on to other places, and so he's writing letters back to them. And they're a mixture of answering theological questions and answering problems that were going on in those churches, and also encouraging the churches who were facing stiff opposition. There's a couple of personal letters that he wrote to other preachers who were pastoring churches and so forth. So he's writing, these are correspondence that he's writing to help other people to understand. And they give us such an insight into what the early church was like, but also they give us the real foundation of our Christian teaching.
Awesome. Now, there was one more thing that you said about how the underground church in Iran, how like women are the ones that are doing it. And what's interesting is, we always hear these talks about how we always hear these little rhetorical things about how the Bible is sexist. The Bible, puts women below men, and all of this stuff. And I find one of the reasons that I thought that the New Testament was a reliable source is because the whole entire testimony relied on a woman at first.
Right.
And like knowing, because I studied the culture of back then, because in order for me to understand it, I wanted to know what the culture was like. To know that even if women saw a man committing a crime, they wouldn't hold up in court. Like their testimony was absolutely nothing, and then God chose, the first person to go run back and knock on someone's door saying he is risen is a woman. And so I do a little bit of work here and there. One of my friends, Darren, has a ministry where he helps a group of Christians in Pakistan. And they're just, I guess they're pulling a Paul, just running up on places, preaching the word, feeding some people, and sit down and listen. It's really cool, and it's being ran by a woman. There's men involved, but the woman is the one really pushing the charge. And I find it interesting. I did some research into societies that have the highest level of women's rights, and we could have a whole other discussion of what constitutes a woman's right. But the highest level of women's rights are where the Christian population is the highest, and the lowest level is in Muslim countries. So I find it very interesting that it's the women who are in the countries where their rights are the worst. Like they really can't do anything. And in those countries, the women are the ones leading the church. I feel like it's such an uppercut to to the world. You know what I mean? So yeah. I'm really glad that you.
I'm glad you raised that. I'm glad you raised that, John, because that's a really critical point. That the accounts of the eyewitnesses all have the women at the empty tomb on Sunday morning, on the resurrection day. That is absolutely countercultural. That they should be the ones to be the first in that time, that they should be the ones chosen. Like you said, a woman's word did not bear much weight in a court of law in the first century, and yet they're the witnesses. What that is a mark of the authenticity of the Gospels. Because if you were making up the story, if you were writing a fictional account about Jesus rising from the dead, they would not have picked women to be the witnesses. They would have had men. So that's a really important mark of the authenticity of the story, because it was just the truth. That's what happened. God chose women to be there. And you're right, Christianity has raised the status of women around the world. I don't think there is another figure in history who has done more to raise the status of women other than Jesus Christ himself. There's no one else other than the Apostle Paul. Paul's writings have lifted the status of women for 2,000 years. It's extraordinary. Yeah.
Yeah. It's really interesting. I always I joke about how he chose women to have the testimony, like to put the testimony on the back of the women, because the men were nowhere to be found. Yeah, they were all in hiding. So I thought that was pretty funny. Yep. So, all right. So that brings us into our third question, and then after that, we'll come into some recommendations that I know you have for us, and we'll come in for a close. So, with all this being said, we could continue talking on just the evidence for the resurrection. Like we could be here for hours going through it all. Why is Easter so important to us Christians? I think I might have lost you. I'm over here touching the screen like if that changes anything. All right, guys, just give it a minute. Hey, Pastor Phil, you're back.
Yeah, I lost you for a minute there. I got you now. Yeah.
All right. So I was just moving on to our third question, which is, I was saying that we could spend hours going through all of this stuff for the. Oh, I think I lost you again. All right. I think you're coming back. I can hear you a little bit, but I can't see you. All right, there you are. I think you might need to move from where you are.
Okay. All right.
I think we're good. So let's move right into this next question. Why is Easter so important to not only us Christians, but why is it important to the world?
Well, the first thing is that Christianity rises and falls with the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. No resurrection, no Christianity. If the resurrection was proven to be false tomorrow, Christianity would fall like a house of cards. That's just the truth. That's not my word. That's not my opinion. The Apostle Paul wrote that. He said it in one of those letters that he wrote to the church in Corinth. He said, if our preaching is not true, then your faith is worthless and you are pitiable for believing it. And so that was Paul's estimation. It has to be true or it's worth nothing. C.S. Lewis made the statement, and in fact, I think I saw it on your bio in Instagram, John. C.S. Lewis said, if Christianity is not true, then it is of no importance. So if the claims of Christianity are not true, it is of no importance. But if Christianity's claims are true, then it is of infinite importance. And he goes on to say, the one thing it cannot be is moderately important. Mm-hmm. So people who say, I think Jesus was a good teacher and he has some good things to say, I'm just not sure it's important to me, they really have not considered the claims of Christianity. Because if he's only a teacher, then he's a liar to begin with, because he said he wasn't just a teacher. He said that he was God come among us. He made that claim. And if he's not, then we should dismiss him out of hand. But if the Bible is true, and if the New Testament gospel is true, there is nothing more important than you will ever consider. I mean, the Christian message, claim number one, is that it makes sense, explains the human condition. People want to they want to ask the question about why there's suffering in the world. The Bible answers that before it answers anything else. That the human condition is because we were created and we have fallen into sin. We were in a condition that God said was good and perfect, but we have fallen to sin. And that's been passed on through every generation of mankind, and we are sinners by nature. But secondly, the Bible makes the claim that God has provided an answer to that, to change everything, to turn everything right again. And that is in the person of Jesus, his death on the cross to pay for our sins, and his resurrection to bring us back to God with newness of life. So here's the thing. If the Christian message is true, and it is of ultimate importance, you owe it to yourself to investigate that at least once in your lifetime. It's not a message that you can dismiss rationally. You've either got to come to the conclusion it's not true and I will dismiss it, but do that having properly investigated, or you come to the conclusion it must be true, and then it's worthy of all of our life's attention. So everyone owes it to themselves to make that investigation at least once in their life. So that's why Easter is absolutely vitally important, because of the claims that Christianity makes. Secondly, I would just finish with this thought, John. That is the times that we live in. We are living in such times of hopelessness and confusion. And the message of Easter is one of hope and one of purpose. And that all of this human history is going somewhere. And that God is still in control. And that he offers real life and solutions for our lives and something beyond this life. And that's something that people today need more than any other time before. Christians love to use that word gospel, and maybe some people don't know what gospel means. It simply means good news. We believe that the Christian message is the best news that has ever been delivered. Now, it's not always delivered as good news. Sometimes people have not done a good job of telling it as good news, but it is. And when it's told as the Bible tells it, it is good news. People need it in 2022 more than I've ever known in my lifetime. That's the message of Easter.
Amen. And I couldn't agree more. I could not agree more. I was hopeless before. Well, I wouldn't say I was hopeless. I had hope in temporary things, and that in long-term thinking is hopeless, because if this life is all that we have, which I don't believe it is, then nothing really matters. And this is why you have Stalins and people like that who have this worldview and just all right, cool. If I'm just matter bumping into other matter, then what does it matter?
I like that.
Yeah, I just came up with that on the spot. You can have that for a certain.
I'm writing that down for something, John. Yeah.
But no, you worded it perfectly, and I'm so glad that we have you on here. So as we come in for a close, I'm a big reader. You're a big reader. By the way, guys, Pastor Phil has read my book before it is out. He gives it.
Everybody needs to get it.
Yep. I actually just got the email back from a woman who's a Christian editor. So I've already she edited like 10 pages of it, and just for me to be able to see, and she looked like she did an incredible job. So I think I found the one. But anyway, you read a lot. I read a lot. There's some pivotal books that have happened that I've happened to read in my life. One of them being I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. But there's also, like, after my, I would say 2 years of research before I fully committed to being a Christian. I would say I was going through the motions for a while, but when I had that aha moment, it was after a lot of research. And after I did all the research, I came across a movie on I think it was Netflix at the time, called The Case for Christ. And I was like, man, if I would have just watched this movie before doing all this research, I could have saved myself a lot of time. And the reason I bring that up is because, I wanted to know some book recommendations from you, and one of the ones that are on the list is The Case for Christ, along with others. So if you could just, give the audience some book recommendations, and as you give them, just a little description of the book and why it's a good book to read.
Yeah, great, John. In fact, I grabbed a few off my shelf and threw them on my desk for this call. So the first one that I would recommend is the oldest book, and it's called Who Moved the Stone by Frank Morrison. Okay, this was written back in the 1930s. It was written by a guy who was a journalist in England, and he set out to disprove the resurrection of Jesus. He was an atheist. He did not believe any of the story, and so he set out to disprove it. He traveled all over the world, and he ended up writing this book. problem was, when he really examined the evidence as a journalist, he could not write the book he set out to write. He ended up writing Who Moved the Stone, which is proofs for the resurrection of Jesus. He converted to Christianity during the writing of this book. And it still does one of the best jobs of laying out the essential evidence of the resurrection. It's been replaced with more recent books, but I still love this book. So if you want to get that, Who Moved the Stone by Frank Morrison, going way back to the 1930s. And then a book after that, a little bit later, came out, was C.S. Lewis, a book called Surprised by Joy. Surprised by Joy by C.S. Lewis. You people tonight probably know him from the movies The Narnia Chronicles. He wrote those. He was an English professor at Oxford University in England. Oxford, Cambridge, one of the two great universities. And he did not want to be a Christian. He was opposed to it. And he argued with Christian friends for 15 years. And it says when he finally considered all of the evidence, he said, I was the most dejected, reluctant convert to Christianity in all of England. But then when he gave his life to God, it almost just gave up in exasperation because the evidence was so strong. He was surprised by joy, how much God came into his life and changed him. And that's what the book is called, Surprised by Joy. It's just a great read in terms of a personal life change because of the fact that Jesus is alive. So that's a great book. The third one is the one you mentioned, The Case for Christ. It has now been made into a movie, and if you don't like reading, watch the movie. John gave you a good plug for that because the movie, they did a pretty good job of it. It was written by Lee Strobel. Lee Strobel was an investigative journalist for the Chicago Tribune. He had done some major pieces in the American automotive industry and had been given awards for his journalism. But he was an atheist. His wife converted to Christianity, and he was so mad that he set out to write down all of the evidence against Christianity to convince her as much as anything else. And in the process, he came to faith in Christ. The evidence was overwhelming. This book, The Case for Christ, probably has the best in terms of gathering all the information into one. So if you want one book recommendation, that would be it, The Case for Christ by Lee Strobel, or watch the movie. If you watch the movie, the book would be a good follow-up. And then finally, one that's been just the last few years it came out, it's called Cold Case Christianity by J. Warner Wallace. I can't recommend this highly enough. We've talked about two journalists and an English professor. Well, this guy was a Los Angeles Police Department homicide detective, and he specialized in cold cases. And so he has applied the normal detective procedures that they would use in the LAPD for a homicide investigation to go back and look at the resurrection. It is stunning, the stuff that he comes out with. And again, he comes to the conclusion Jesus Christ had to have risen from the dead. It's an amazing book. So those four books would be my favorites, I think. There's some other good ones, I'm sure, but hopefully those will help somebody.
Yeah, I go on YouTube binges, and J. Warner Wallace is somebody that I've listened to a lot over time. His perspective on things is just like, I would never know how forensics works if it wasn't for listening to him and how he uses that to like dig in. It's like, how do you deny it? Like, how do you deny when these experts? Anyway, I could go on a rant. Talking about all of that stuff. And I just I want to piggyback off what you said. The reason why books like that are so important is, and don't get me wrong, there's no book better than this one right here. There was 66 of them in there. There's no better library than this one right here. But reading these type of books is what helped me not only become a Christian, but to solidify my faith. And I believe that one of the issues in the church today is that people have a feeling of faith, but they don't have an intellectual reason for what they believe. And look, I'll take a salvation any way we can get it. You know what I mean? Like I'll take that. But when people who just have feelings of faith then get around people who just know a little bit more about the Bible than you might know, they can shoot down your whole entire faith in a 5-minute conversation. So reading the books that Pastor Phil has recommended, I highly recommend it. I haven't read 2 of them, I believe, and I haven't read 2 of them. I have the C.S. Lewis book. I skimmed through it. I did not read it fully, but there's a reason he's recommending it. These things will help solidify your faith. If you're a new Christian, or if you've been a Christian for a long time, find books like these. Put down the Tony Robbins just for a little bit, like just a little bit. If you want to, do Tony Robbins, that's cool, but just like take some time and read some of these books, because man, do they help me. I can't even, it's difficult for me to read anything else, like really is. So with that being said, Pastor Phil, if we're about to hit an hour, if there's anything that you would like to leave the audience with before we close this out, whatever's in your spirit, or if anything, I know you probably want to invite them to church, so that's probably one thing. But if there's anything else that you'd like to say before we go, you've already said so much, and we truly appreciate you.
Yeah, I just piggyback on what you said right at the end there. Remind you that the Bible tells us to love God with all of our heart, strength, soul, and mind. Christianity does not ask you to disengage your brain. And so you can investigate Christianity rationally, reasonably, and see that it makes sense. And so I encourage you to read, exactly as John was saying, and study these things. Other than that, we'd love you to hear some more. So join our Instagram at Brookfield First, so that you can see when we publish things. And if you're in the area around Brookfield, the city of Danbury, we'd love to see you this weekend. Come out for our Easter service at 10 a.m. on Sunday morning. Just be fantastic to see you. Introduce yourself. We'd love to say hi.
And if you can't make it in person, Gio and I will be hosting the online service. So, right. But like I said, if you're within a 3-hour driving window, I would probably make it to church. It's going to be a lot of fun. Well, Pastor Phil, I could sit here and talk to you for hours. Thank you so much for everything that you've said here, for everything that you've done in me and Gio's lives and the lives of countless others that are blessed to know you. We appreciate you. Also want to say thank you guys for tuning in. Thank you everybody who's been here. If you're seeing the replay of this, just make sure that you follow Brookfield First on Instagram. Make sure you subscribe to them on YouTube. If you want to catch some great sermons, subscribe to them on YouTube. So what we're going to be doing is I'm going to be downloading this right here, and then it's going to be uploaded tomorrow on my YouTube channel. So you'll only be able to see it on here if you were live, and then it's going to be uploaded to YouTube tomorrow. So thank you guys for being here. Thank you, Pastor Phil, for being here, and we will see you guys on the next one. All right.
Thanks, John. Appreciate it.
Thank you.